Welcome to the Get Published podcast, sponsored by Brodie Consulting Group. To get more information about our coaching, publishing, executive ghostwriting, and podcast production services, go to getpublishedpodcast.com. Hello, I am Paul Brodie, and thank you for joining us for another episode of the Get Published podcast, where we help authors get published with a proven system that works. Today, we're being joined by Dr. Leanna Manuel, author of Unleash Your Primal Power. Dr. Lee, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Well, we are thrilled to have you. Are you ready to begin?
Let's go.
All right. Question number one. What is the one piece of advice that you would give to a first-time author who is currently writing their book?
I think the best piece of advice is to know your purpose, what it is that you want to accomplish by writing the book. This is my third book, and I found that my purpose was different with each of them. And I've tried to start without knowing my purpose, and it just gets all scattered, and it's hard to stay in line. And so if you can define your purpose pretty clearly and even write that down on paper, it can help you tremendously in making more consistent progress.
And what do you feel is the hardest part about getting published?
Boy, evaluating all of the options that are out there, I think, is one of the harder parts. Back in the day, you really didn't have options. You sent out letters, you weathered rejection, and prayed for something to happen. But now with on-demand publishing and ebooks and traditional publishing, it's hard to determine what's the best route for your particular book and your particular purpose. And so, knowing what it is that each has to offer, I think, is probably the hardest part.
Well, and with your journey, as we were talking about before the show, you self-published your first two books, and then you went with a publisher who we're not going to name on the show, but you went through a publisher where you didn't have the greatest experience. So could you walk us through that process?
Well, the first two, I liked having complete creative power over my book and having it come out exactly like I had envisioned it. But I found out that there are some parts of book publishing that I am not patient with and frankly not very good at, such as the actual page design layout and things like that. And I felt that someone else that is experienced in the business would be a better option. So I chose the third time to this current one to go with it has a fancy name. I can't think of what it's called, but it's basically an author-assisted publishing because there would be somebody that could do those things that I don't like. I'm not a computer person, and so figuring things out in design programs was just too frustrating. But what I found out was that, one, I don't like to relinquish control, which was hard to face. And two, nobody else really seemed to care about my book the way I care about my book. And while intellectually I knew that going in terms of working, I found it very, very hard. And then when they were not responsive to my questions, I felt paralyzed with what to do because I didn't want to alienate my publisher, but at the same time, I didn't feel like my needs for my book were being met. Does that make sense?
It does. And I think that's one of the biggest things. I know when we started focusing more on the hybrid side of our company with our publishing, one of the biggest things that I thought about, because I've had 15 of my own books, is the number one thing that I would want if I was to work with another publisher is to have creative control. And that's one of the things that we always give our clients is they have final cut, they keep that creative control. But the second thing is that you have someone that you can be in communication with within 24 hours. That way, if you have a question that you personally are guaranteeing them a 24-hour response, because a lot of things come up when you publish a book, even if you publish your own
Mm,
first few books. But when you are giving your baby to someone else, given that book, that you're going to have questions, and you want to make sure that the layout is the way you want it, the interior layout, and also the book cover, and making sure that you're having that collaboration. So when we
right.
transitioned over to our publishing company, that was some of the things that we focused on. We wanted it to be all about the clients, and also to hit up those pain points, going, okay, these are the things I think are the three biggest challenges, so let's find a way to answer those. Because that's the one thing we've noticed, is when things do go south, some of the stories that we've heard about experiences of other publishers, those always seem to be the same commonalities.
Right. I mean, with mine, there was not, and I gave this feedback to the company, there was not one consistent person to talk to through the entire process.
Yep.
And along the way, many people left that company that had responsibilities for my book that I was never notified that they had left. So there was no return phone calls or emails. And I
Jeez.
was constantly then trying to find the next person to talk to get things sorted out. And so there was probably at least a 4 to 5 month delay in my publishing experience because of people just falling off the face of the earth.
And I love that you mentioned that, because with our company, one of the main things is I'm always the main point of contact with our clients. And I always get the question, well, why don't you delegate that out to your project managers? And I'm going, no. I say, they're investing with us. I will be their personal point person. I will be the one that responds to them in 24 hours, because end of the day, when it's your business, the buck stops with you. And the last thing you want to do is have staff members that there may be turnover, or they may not necessarily do their jobs right. With us, we have one other project manager, and they focus on our business book project that we do every year, where we have so many people like contributing chapters, like a multi-author project. She'll deal with that. But in regards to the actual project management for our clients, that is always my main thing, because end of the day, as the owner of the business, I'm not going anywhere. And I think sometimes that's the
Right.
challenge when you have staff. Things are going to change. I mean, we've had the occasional turnover even with our business. Most of our people we've had now for almost 5 years, but there's always a little bit of turnover. It's just human nature. But yeah, it's very
Sure.
difficult when you are going to work with some of these larger publishers, and they have someone that's going to be specifically to help you, and then they move on, or they've had a change, and that can be very frustrating.
Well, I did find it frustrating. And again, it was the balance between how much do I complain
Yeah.
and ruin a relationship with the person who's publishing my book, and how much do I be a doormat. And that was a little hard for me to negotiate.
Yeah, it is a sticky wicket. And of course, we get the publishing done. And then, of course, after that is the marketing. And I do want to touch
Yeah.
briefly, because I know we talked about this prior to the show. But if you're able to, just feel free to share with us a marketing strategy or strategies that you used in the book launch. The ones that you felt worked pretty well. Because I know, as we mentioned before, some strategies didn't work so well. So let's just talk a little bit about the marketing side.
Well, overall, the marketing side has been difficult because I did have a limited budget. Um, and advertising on the bigger markets is expensive, exceedingly expensive. So a lot of mine has been word of mouth. I did reach out to people in my industry asking for endorsements and for them to share the word, and that has been somewhat successful. I hired a freelance publicist, and she has been somewhat successful in getting the word out. But overall, I have not yet found a strategy that really opened the floodgates for me. Now, it is still early in my process, and there are such significant delays in seeing reports on how many books you've sold, and royalties, that I honestly don't know at this point yet how my book is doing, because the data is so slow coming in. So maybe I'm doing better than I think I am. But I haven't quite figured this part out yet, and haven't had the extra cash to throw at it.
And I think that's one of the biggest challenges, because in any endeavor, you got to spend money to make money, and marketing's always the most
Mm-hmm.
expensive part. working with different book promo companies, different strategies that you've got to put in with that. It can be a process, and it can be a daunting process, especially if you don't have someone there to guide you through that journey.
Right. I mean, and like I said, it's not that I'm not doing anything, but I really don't know how it's doing just yet.
Well, speaking of books, I'd like to know what is your favorite book and what was the number one thing that you learned from it?
Can I give you two?
Absolutely.
All right. So the first one is Eat, Pray, Love by Elizabeth Gilbert. That is my go-to book whenever I need a break from anything that is business psychology related. And every time I usually listen on audiobook, and every time I listen to it, I learn something new. But the number one thing that I need from that book is always the message of finding balance, because I have such a tendency to get so over-focused in one area of my life or another that one just reminds me to breathe and find balance in my life. The second is really a series. It's the Sword of Truth series by Terry Goodkind, because the main character in there frequently shares this wisdom of focus on the solution, not the problem. And my tendency is to just go the opposite way and focus on all the problems and analyze them to an infinite degree. And so many times in my life since I've started reading this series, those words come back to me and remind me to focus on solutions and not get stuck in the problem.
And for a final question, what is your favorite quote and why?
My favorite quote comes from Winnie the Pooh, and it is, "Sometimes the smallest things take up the most room in your heart."
And why is that your favorite quote?
Pardon?
Why is that your favorite quote? Which, by the way, is a great quote.
Why?
Yes.
Why? Because I think we tend to always look for the big things, the flashy, the things that everybody else says is important, rather than just looking in and finding out what fills us. We spend so much time being human doings instead of human beings, and this quote just kind of brings that back for me.
Excellent. Well, Dr. Lee, I want to thank you for being a guest on the show. What is the best way for people to find you online?
The best way is drleannamanuel.com. So it's drleannamanuel.com.
Well, thank you once again for being on our show, and I wish you all the best in your author journey ahead.
Thank you so very much for having me on.
Thanks again for joining us today. To learn more about how you can be featured in our brand new Get Published business book, go to getpublishedpodcast.com.